Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development, what I've been doing is creating a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College AWD 1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class for the fall 2019 semester. The textbook that's going to be used for the class is the one shown on screen right now, and that is Pro ASP.NET MVC 5, an A-Press text by Adam Freeman. Now, I do want to start by, I'm not apologizing, but I just want to say this, and that is I'm in Chapter 11. Actually, I finished Chapter 11, or I'd like to say I finished it, talking about administration. The problem I have is I can come in here, as I showed the other day, and for instance, I can go to soccer ball and change it from FIFA approved. I'm just going to remove that right there. All right, just that. And I'm going to click Save. In fact, if I click Cancel and Return to List, you'll notice nothing happened. All right, I come back there, and it's still there. Now I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to click Save. The problem that I have when I click Save is rather than changing it, it's making a new record. So when I'm asking to do an edit, I am instead doing an insert. And you can see that it's gone from here. But if I cancel and return to the list, the original was not changed. All right? Now I can come in here and I can go to that record, which I don't want, and delete it. The problem is, you may or may not have noticed that when I did that, it became record number 15. So the IDs are getting all screwed up here because I've made several changes. I went back, I'm not apologizing, but I went back and tried to fix it, and as far as I can tell, if there's an error here, I'm not exactly sure what the error is. Because again, I have come through here and I have been looking for any possible error, and as I said, I haven't found it. But rather than keep myself stuck right here, which is pretty much what I've done, because I spent a lot of time on this, all right, I'm going to leave it for now the way it is. And I'm not saying that's a right thing to do, not at all, but I do want to go on and start Chapter 12, Sports Store, Security and Finishing Touches. And the author mentions here in this chapter, I'm going to show you how to prevent random people from using. So right now, anyone can come in here and be an administrator. We don't want that, of course. Once we have the security in place, we will complete the app by adding support for images. Might seem like a simple feature, but it requires some interesting techniques. There's more work to it than may meet the eye, as they say. All right, because ASP.NET MVC is built on the core ASP.NET platform, we have access to the ASP.NET Authentication and Authorization features, which are, as it says, packaged as a general purpose system to keep track of who's logged in. All right. Key thing here, in this chapter, we only touch on the security features available. So in other words, this is not an all-encompassing chapter on security. All right. With that said, let's start on the bottom of the page. I'm going to start by configuring Forms Authentication, which is one of the ways in which users can be authenticated in an ASP.NET application. All right. Now think about authentication versus authorization. All right. When I go into Rankin Technical College and I log in and I put in JP Scott, which is my login, and I put in my password, I'm being authenticated. If I put in an incorrect password, it won't let me in the system. If for some reason I screw up my login, it won't let me in the system. But supposing I put in a valid password, a valid username and a valid password, I am now authenticated. Then I have to be authorized. In other words, I can look at my stuff in Rankin. So in other words, what I see when I go out here and I go to insiderankin.org, all right, I see things in here that if I go and now I'm logging in, another authentication, now I'm authorized. So if I go over here to academics, all right, and I've got like current courses, past courses, etc. So if I go to past courses, it'll show me what I had last semester. All right, it's showing me the courses I had during spring 2019. Why am I telling you that? Because if, for example, one of my contemporaries, Paul Smith, at the St. Louis campus went in, his would look different than mine. Because although we both taught the AWD 1112 class, to my knowledge, Paul didn't teach AWD 1100. So what I'm trying to get across to you here is when we go through there and we start doing this, when you get authenticated, all right, everybody has to get authenticated, but what you're authorized to do will vary based on the user. All right, so the author says in figure 12.1, you can see the additions we're going to make to the web.config file. All right, and in the Sports UI project, the one in the root of the project, so what I call the main web.config, not the one in the views folder. So we're going to go down to here, and it looks like it's right at the bottom of system.web. Again, I'm just trying to follow the author's lead here. All right, there's system.web. Okay, so what we're saying here is after 2,880, I don't know if that's seconds or milliseconds, okay, that we want a timeout. So if we can't log in within that time, all right, basically we're saying it's kind of hopeless for lack of better words. So they mention here authentication is set up using the authentication element, and we have used the mode attribute to specify that we want forms authentication, which is the kind most often used in internet-facing web apps. All right. Back in ASP.NET 4.5.1, Microsoft added support for other things that's described in one of the author's other books. But as he says, I'm going to stick to forms authentication because it works with local credentials and it's relatively simple to set up and manage. So the main alternatives are Windows and organizational. Fine. I'm not going to touch that. All right, so the bottom of page 306, the author says here, the login URL attribute. In fact, let's jump back to here. This is the line now in question. So as the author says here, the login URL attribute tells ASP.NET where to redirect users when they need to authenticate themselves. In this case, the tilde, which means start from the root of the project, /account/login URL. All right, and the timeout attribute specifies how long a user remains authenticated once they have successfully logged in. Okay, so I screwed up. This is in minutes. 2,880 minutes is 2 days, 48 hours. The next step is to tell ASP.NET where it'll get the details of the application users. The author says that he's broken this down into a separate step because what he's about to do here is something you should never, ever do in a real project. We're going to define the username and the password in the web.config file. Now, I don't think it's going nuts here to say you should never, ever do that. I mean, let's be real here. That would be one of the more foolhardy things you could ever do. All right? So we're going to change this. I'm just going to grab everything in here in forms. All right? Because right now, that line of code in here is just this line, and we're replacing it with like 4 lines. All right? So the format clear text means that we're not even taking the password and encrypting it. So the user's name is admin, the password is secret. All right, I'm at 10 minutes, but I want to finish this part of the lecture with a very, very quick story. All right, I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you. They have done studies. Now, this is not so much now, but in the past, where, for instance, one of the most popular passwords was password. And they tell people, okay, you've got to have a number in it. So it was password, but the O in password was a 0. Okay, you've got to put a special character in it. Then it became password with a 0 instead of an O with a comma on the end. Before I began my career as an instructor of information technology, my first job in information technology was I was a programmer for AT&T Bell Laboratories before they had their big breakup in the 80s. I had been there, I couldn't tell you how long. I'm going to guess about 6 months. And my boss came by, and we were all working on a project. We were behind, but the boss came by, and he went up to, basically, he was going up to every office. And he said, and we had a bunch of offices, one right after the other. Okay, we had walls between us, but we had 2-person offices. Unless you were a supervisor, then you got a 1-person office. I was not a supervisor. But my boss came by and talked to me and my partner and said, there is a meeting, a department meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock. It is mandatory. And he just walked away. He didn't say what it was about. He didn't say anything. All right. So my boss was a really, really great guy. His name was Chun Chow. And, okay, I took him at his word, so I was there at 2 o'clock. His boss was a gentleman named Bernie, probably Bernard, I don't know, Bernie Yokelson. And Chun came in and said, okay, we're going to have a talk here about some problems and some things that, and basically as he was saying this, Bernie walked in. And Bernie was very red in the face. He was a gentleman who was smaller in stature. I'd say he was about 5.5 feet tall. Very nice person. Very good guy. Okay. But he came in red-faced. And what had happened was Bell Labs had hired a bunch of young kids to come in and see in our department, which was made up of approximately 75 people, how many passwords they could crack. And as it turned out, they cracked, I think it was between 75 and 80% of our passwords. So let's say it's 80%. That means they were able to get into 60 of the 75 accounts in our department. This is what upset Mr. Yokelson, because some of those accounts they were able to get into, no joke, were people who were working with the Defense Department arm of AT&T. So he came in and basically told us, we better get really good passwords, get them quick. Okay? Now, you may have seen this already. Again, I'm not trying to bore anybody, but I can come in here and I can type right in my address bar here, password generator. All right, I use this. Okay? When I give students passwords for the server for Rankin Technical College, I usually set up like about a 12-character password, not 13, 12, and I say generate password. So look at this. No, this is not, to my knowledge, one of the ones I've ever generated. All right? But if you look at this, FU, little f, little u, MY, big M, big Y, tilde, 4, underscore, 3, capital Y, @ capital Z, lowercase e. Probably not one that most people would guess. That's the kind of thing you should be shooting for. All right, I'll just end it right here. So when I continue on in just a couple minutes, the author said we want to keep the example simple and focus on how MVC allows you to do all this stuff, okay? Putting credentials in web.config is a recipe for disaster. Of course it is. Don't store them, and don't store them as plain text. Okay. Despite being unsuitable for real projects, using web.config to store credentials, in this case, allows the author to focus on the features without being sidetracked by the aspects of the ASP.NET platform. The result, as it says, is that we have a hard-coded username now, admin, and a hard-coded password, which is secret. All right, so we're going to pick it up in just a minute on page 307, talking about applying authorization with filters. I'll be back with that shortly.